Nobody remembered who laughed first. It might have been one of the Dravani delegates, those tall insectoid creatures with wings like stained glass, who controlled half the trade routes in known space. Or maybe it was a Sathine warrior, 7 feet of armored reptilian muscle, who found the whole thing amusing. But once the laughter started, it spread through the great chamber of the Ethimer station like a wave, and every alien species present joined in. They were laughing at humanity. The conclave of sovereign species met once every galactic cycle to discuss borders, trade, and threats. Dozens of civilizations sent their finest representatives. The Dravani brought wealth. The Paulori, a hive mind species that moved like living fog, brought the largest fleet anyone had ever assembled. The Sathine brought fear. Together, these three ruled the galaxy in everything but name. And then there were the humans. Rena Sandoval walked into that enormous chamber with 6 people behind her and nothing else. No warships in orbit. No impressive technology on display. Humanity did not even have its own faster-than-light engines. They had arrived by hitching a ride on a Paulori cargo lane, like travelers catching a bus. The Dravani speaker, a graceful figure named Alamis, stood at the central podium and welcomed the new species to the galactic stage. He was polite about it. He listed humanity's homeworld, a small rocky planet orbiting an average star, and noted their recent discovery by a Paulori survey vessel. That was when the Sathine commander Bragan stood up from his seat. He was enormous even by his species standards, his scales dark green and scarred from old battles. He looked at Rena and her small delegation the way a predator looks at something too small to bother eating. "This is what the survey ships found," Bragan said, loud enough for the whole chamber to hear. "Soft skin, no clothes, no venom, no armor. They cannot even leave their own system without borrowing our roads." He let out a rumbling laugh. "Why are they here? What could they possibly offer?" The laughter rolled through the chamber again. Even species that had no reason to mock others joined in, because it felt safe. Because everyone else was doing it, Rena stood still through all of it. She was not tall. She was not physically impressive. She wore a simple, dark uniform with no medals or decorations. Her face showed nothing. No anger, no shame, no fear. She waited until the noise died down on its own, and then she smiled. It was a small, patient smile, the kind a person gives when they know something no one else in the room knows. She took her assigned seat without saying a single word. After the session, Alamis approached her privately. He was more thoughtful than the others, and perhaps a little guilty about the reception. "I apologize for the behavior of some delegates," he said. "The conclave can be unwelcoming to newcomers." "No need to apologize," Rena said. "We expected it." "You did. We have been listening to your transmissions for nearly 20 years, she said calmly. "We know how the galaxy treats the small and the weak. We have watched species ask for help and get ignored. We have watched colonies die while the powerful argued about jurisdiction." She paused. "We learned a great deal about all of you before we ever said hello." Alamis studied her for a long moment. Something in her tone made his antennae twitch, a Dravani sign of unease. 20 years is a long time to watch in silence, he said. "Yes," Rena agreed. "It is." She said nothing more, and Alamis eventually walked away with a strange feeling that he had missed something important in the days that followed. The human delegation was mostly ignored. They attended sessions quietly. They took notes. They asked polite questions that were usually dismissed. A few of the smaller species, the fox-like finny traders and the gentle aquatic Bavari, were kind to them, perhaps because they knew what it felt like to be overlooked. Bragan made a point of mocking the humans whenever the opportunity arose. He called Earth a nursery world and suggested that humans should be classified as a protected species rather than a sovereign one. His followers found this hilarious. Rena never responded to any of it. She simply watched, listened, and sent reports back to Earth through encrypted channels that no one in the conclave thought to monitor, because no one considered humanity important enough to spy on. That was their first mistake. Far from Ethimer Station, far from any mapped trade route or charted system, something drifted in the emptiness between stars. It had no running lights. It produced no heat. It emitted no energy of any kind. Against the black of deep space, it was invisible, just a shape, vast and angular, blocking the faint light of distant stars as it passed. IT had been out there for a long time, waiting. If anyone had been close enough to see it, they would have noticed that its hull bore no markings, no name, and no flag. But built into the metal, so small that only human eyes would know where to look, was a single word: silence. The IT drifted on, patient and dark, while the galaxy laughed at the species that built it. The distress signal lasted 9 seconds before it died. 9 seconds of screaming, static, and then a sound that did not belong to any known species. A deep, low pulse that seemed to press against the inside of the skull, even through a recording. Rena Sandoval played it 3 times in the small communications room of humanity's outpost on the edge of map space. Each time, the pulse made her stomach turn. Each time, the screaming cut off at exactly the same moment, as if someone had simply erased the people making it. This was the 4th signal in 2 months. For colonies. For silences. The first had been a finny trading post on a frozen moon. 43 merchants and their families, gone overnight. The Palori classified it as a pirate raid and moved on. The second was a Bivari farming settlement on a water world. Over 200 farmers gone. The Sathine said it was not their territory and therefore not their problem. The third was another Feni outpost. This time, a passing freighter found the station still intact, but completely empty. No bodies, no blood, no damage, just empty rooms and that strange, resonant pulse still echoing faintly in the station's recording systems. Rena reported each incident to the Conclave. Each time, she was politely ignored. Bragan sent her a message after the 3rd report. It read, "Stop wasting the Council's time with frontier nonsense. Small species lose small colonies. This is the natural order." Rena did not reply to Bragan. Instead, she focused on finding someone who had actually survived an attack. She found him at a refueling depot 3 systems away from her outpost. His name was Polth, and he was a Feni merchant captain, small, sharp-eared, with rust-colored fur that was matted and unwashed. His ship was barely holding together. One engine was dead. The hull was scorched. He sat in a corner of the depot's common area, drinking something bitter and staring at the wall. Most people at the depot were avoiding him. A panicked Feni ranting about ghost ships was not good company. Rena sat down across from him and said, "Tell me what you saw." Polth looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. "You are the human." "Yes." "Nobody listens to Feni traders." "I am listening." Polth was quiet for a moment. Then the story came pouring out. His convoy had been 3 ships carrying grain and medical supplies to an outer colony. They had dropped out of faster-than-light travel at a routine waypoint and found something waiting for them. Black ships. Massive, angular, without any running lights or engine flare. They just appeared, as if they had been sitting in the darkness all along, perfectly still and perfectly silent. The lead ship in Polth's convoy tried to hail them. No response. It tried to change course. The black ships moved to block it, matching every maneuver instantly. Then the pulse hit. Polth described it as a pressure inside his head, a sound that was not really a sound but something deeper. His instruments went wild. His navigation failed. His communication scrambled. One of the other convoy ships simply stopped moving, its systems completely dead. Then the black ships began to take things. Not cargo, not technology. They attached themselves to the disabled ships, and Polth could see, through his failing sensors, that they were removing biological material. They were harvesting the crews. Polth survived only because his ship's engine exploded at the right moment. The blast threw his vessel away from the convoy at high speed, spinning and burning. By the time he regained control, the black ships were gone. So were the other 2 ships and everyone on them. "I tried to tell the Palori," Polth said, his voice shaking. "They said I was drunk. I tried to tell the Sathine patrol. They told me to file a report and leave." He looked at Rena. "Why do you care? You are human. You are even smaller than we are." Rena did not answer the question. She pulled out a recording device. "I need you to describe the ships again. Every detail. The shape, the size, the way they moved. Everything. Polth talked for 2 hours. Rena recorded every word. When he was finished, she uploaded the full recording along with the distress signals and sensor data she had collected. She encrypted everything and sent it not to the Conclave, not to any galactic authority, but through a private channel aimed at a single point in humanity's home system, a facility buried deep beneath the frozen surface of Mars. The facility had no official name. It did not appear on any public record. For 20 years, while humanity smiled politely at the galaxy and accepted every insult and dismissal without complaint, the people in that facility had been building something. They had studied every piece of alien technology they could access. They had listened to every transmission, mapped every fleet movement, and analyzed every weapon system the galactic powers used. And they had asked one simple question: if everything goes wrong, what do we need to survive? The answer had taken 2 decades to build. Rena waited in her small outpost, watching the stars through a narrow window. The reply from Mars came 6 hours later. It was short, 2 words on a black screen. "We're ready." Rena closed her eyes and let out a long breath. She had hoped this day would never come, but she had always known it would. Out in the darkness between stars, something that had been sleeping began to wake. 3 Bavari worlds died in 7 days. Not attacked, not conquered, emptied. Every living thing on their surfaces was gone. Every farmer, every child, every fish in their carefully tended ocean colonies. The water remained. The buildings remained. The food was still growing in the fields. But the people were gone, and the only trace left behind was that low, resonant pulse still humming through the empty cities like a heartbeat that belonged to nothing alive. The galaxy could not ignore it anymore. The Conclave called an emergency session. For the first time in living memory, every seat was filled. The Dravani delegates sat rigid and silent, their glass-like wings folded tight against their backs. The Palori rippled with anxiety, their fog-like bodies shifting color from pale blue to deep gray. Even the Sathine, who feared nothing, sat with their clawed hands resting on their weapon belts. The smaller species filled the upper galleries. The Feni huddled together, whispering. The Bavari survivors, those few who had been off-world when their planets were harvested, wept openly, their translucent skin flushed dark with grief. Alami stood at the central podium and called for order. His voice was steady, but his antennae were pressed flat against his head, a Dravani sign of deep distress. "We face an enemy we do not understand," he said. "They do not speak. They do not negotiate. They do not claim territory. They take life and leave everything else behind. In 4 months, we have lost 11 colonies and an estimated 60,000 souls. The Palori lost a patrol fleet of 30 warships last week. There were no survivors. Silence hung in the chamber. 30 warships was not a small number. The Palori had the largest fleet in the galaxy, and losing 30 ships in a single engagement had shaken them badly. Bragan stood. The Sathine commander looked different from the last time Rena had seen him. His arrogance was still there, but something else had crept in behind it. He proposed a full military response. The Sathine war fleet, 200 warships strong, would hunt the enemy down and destroy them. He spoke with confidence, pounding his fist on the table for emphasis. The Conclave approved his plan immediately. They needed someone to do something, and the Sathine were the only ones volunteering. Then Rena asked to speak. The chamber went quiet. Some of the delegates had forgotten humanity was even present. Rena walked to the floor with the same calm she had shown months ago when they laughed at her. She carried a data pad and nothing else. "I have been tracking these attacks since the first Feni outpost went dark," she said. Her voice was clear and even. "The pattern is not random. The raids form a spiral, moving inward from the outer territories toward the galactic core. Each attack is closer to your home systems than the last. Whatever this enemy is, it is not raiding. It is advancing." She placed the data pad on the podium and projected a map. The attack sites formed a clear, tightening spiral. The next logical targets were Sathine border worlds. "Commander Bragan's fleet will meet this enemy head-on," Rena continued. "I respect his courage. But based on everything we have gathered, the sensor data, the recordings, the testimony of survivors. I believe this enemy is unlike anything the galaxy has faced before. I believe your weapons may not be enough. Bragan snorted. And what would a species that cannot even build its own star drive know about warfare? More than you might expect, Renus said quietly. What do you propose? Alamis asked. Let us help, Renus said. Humanity has resources that could support this fight. We ask only for the chance. The conclave voted. The motion failed. 17 species voted against allowing humanity to participate. The reasons were the same as always: too young, too weak, too primitive. The Sathine would handle this alone. Rena nodded as if she had expected the result. She gathered her datapad and walked out of the chamber without another word. In the corridor outside, Polth was waiting. The Finny trader had cleaned himself up since their last meeting. His fur was brushed, his eyes clearer, but the fear was still there underneath. They said no, he guessed. They said no, Rena confirmed. What now? Rena looked at him for a long moment. Now we do what we were always going to do. We just do it without their permission. She opened a secure channel on her communicator and spoke 3 words: begin final preparations. On Earth, in shipyards hidden beneath mountain ranges and ocean floors, lights came on in facilities that the rest of the galaxy did not know existed. On Mars, deep underground, engineers ran final checks on systems that had taken 20 years to perfect. In the asteroid belt, pilots climbed into cockpits and began running launch sequences. Admiral Danny Reeves stood in a command center car from solid rock, watching holographic displays light up one by one as every hidden human asset reported ready. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too many worst-case scenarios to be surprised by one more. Her second-in-command handed her a status report. Every system was green. 20 years of silent work, finished and waiting. Danny looked at the main display, where the Sathine war fleet was already moving toward the frontier. 200 warships, the pride of the galaxy's most feared warriors, flying towards something they did not understand. She knew what was going to happen to them. She had run the simulations 1,000 times. Launch the silence, she said, and out in the darkness, something moved. The Sathine war fleet died in 47 minutes. 200 warships, the most feared armada in the galaxy, met the enemy near the Bavari frontier and discovered that fear means nothing to something that does not think, does not feel, and does not stop. Bragan commanded from the bridge of his flagship, the Iron Tooth, a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons that had crushed a dozen rebellions. When the black ships appeared on his sensors, he gave the order to fire with the kind of confidence that comes from never having lost. The first volley hit perfectly. Energy beams, kinetic shells, plasma torpedoes, everything the Sathine had delivered with brutal accuracy. The shot struck the black ships and did nothing. The energy was absorbed. The shells bounced off or shattered. The torpedoes detonated against hulls that did not even scorch. Then the pulse HIT rolled through the Sathine fleet like a wave of pressure, and every system on every ship flickered. Navigation went dark. Targeting failed. Communications dissolved into static. Ships that had been holding formation began to drift, blind and confused. The black ships moved through the chaos with terrible patience. They did not rush. They attached themselves to the disabled Sathine vessels one by one and began the harvesting. Bragan watched on a backup screen as the ship next to his was enveloped by a black vessel twice its size, and then the crew readings simply stopped. 2,000 Sathine warriors, gone in seconds. By the time the pulse faded enough for the surviving ships to regain partial power, over 150 Sathine warships were empty hulks. The rest were damaged, scattered, and running. Bragan's own flagship was drifting without engines, its crew alive but helpless. The most powerful military force in the galaxy had been broken in less than an hour. News of the defeat spread faster than light. The Paolori immediately began pulling their fleets back to defend their home systems. The Dravani sealed every trade route and border crossing. Smaller species had nowhere to run and no one to ask for help. Evacuation orders went out across dozens of worlds, but there were not enough ships for everyone. and panic turned to despair on Ethimer Station, the conclave chamber was half empty. Many delegates had already fled. Those who remained sat in silence, staring at the tactical display showing the enemy armada advancing steadily inward. At its current pace, it would reach the first major population centers within 3 weeks. Alamy stood at the podium, but for once he had nothing to say. And then every long-range sensor in the galaxy detected something new that IT appeared without warning. A single object dropping out of faster-than-light travel in the space between the enemy fleet and the inner systems. Every species that had sensor capability turned their instruments toward it at the same time, and what they saw made them stop breathing. IT was a ship. But calling it a ship was like calling an ocean a puddle. IT was enormous. Larger than the biggest Palori dreadnought. Larger than Ethimer Station. It was matte black and angular, with lines that looked less like engineering and more like geometry given physical form. It produced no heat signature, no energy emissions, no radiation of any kind. On sensors, it appeared as an absence, a hole in space where something should be. The galaxy had never seen faster-than-light technology from humanity. They did not know humans had it. They did not know humans had anything. The ship was the silence. IT moved toward the enemy fleet without broadcasting a single transmission. No warnings, no demands, no identification. It simply advanced, alone, toward hundreds of hostile vessels. The enemy fired first. The resonant pulse that had crippled the Sathine fleet washed over the silence and broke apart against its hull like water against stone. Energy weapons struck it and dissipated. The black ships, perhaps confused for the first time, fired everything they had in a concentrated barrage. The silence did not slow down. Then it fired. There was no beam, no projectile, no flash of light. The space around one enemy capital ship simply bent inward, folding like paper being crumpled by an invisible hand. The ship compressed, twisted, and vanished. Where it had been, there was nothing. Not debris, not gas, nothing. The silence fired again. Another enemy ship ceased to exist. Then another. Then 5 at once. The Black Fleet broke. For the first time since they had appeared in the galaxy, the enemy retreated. They pulled away, accelerating into the void with a speed that suggested something very close to panic. The silence did not chase them. It held its position, a dark sentinel floating in empty space, standing between the enemy and everything behind it. Across the galaxy, every species watched. The Dravani stared at their screens with their antennae raised in disbelief. The Palori went completely still, their fog-like bodies frozen in a shade of white that meant pure shock. The Sathine survivors, drifting in their broken ships, saw the human warship on their backup sensors and said nothing at all. On Ethimer Station, Alamis slowly sat down. His hands were shaking. In her small outpost, Rena Sandoval watched the same sensor feed as everyone else. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She closed her eyes and whispered something under her breath that might have been a prayer or might have been an apology. Aboard the silence, Admiral Danny Reeves stood at the center of her command deck, watching the enemy retreat on the main display. Her crew was silent. The ship hummed faintly around them, alive with power that the rest of the galaxy was only now beginning to understand. "Hold position," Danny said quietly. "We are not done yet." She was right. The enemy had retreated, but they had not been destroyed, and they would learn from this. For 3 days after battle, no one in the galaxy spoke to the humans. Not because they were angry, because they did not know what to say. Every species had the same question, and none of them wanted to be the first to ask it. How long had humanity been hiding this? What else were they hiding? And the question that frightened them the most, if the humans could do this to the enemy, what could they do to everyone else? It was the Dravani who broke the silence. Alamy sent a formal request to Rena Sandoval for a private meeting. She accepted immediately and arrived at Ethimer Station the next day, alone, wearing the same simple dark uniform she had worn the first time the galaxy laughed at her. The conclave chamber was full again, but the mood was entirely different. When Rena walked in, every conversation stopped. Every eye, every sensor, every attention turned toward her. The small, soft human that Bragan had called prey now carried the weight of every stare in the room, and she carried it without bending. Alamis stood at the podium. Ambassador Sandoval, he said, and the title carried a respect that had never been there before. The conclave owes humanity a debt. You warned us. We did not listen. You offered help. We refused it. He paused. We are listening now. Rena stepped to the floor. She looked around the chamber slowly, meeting the eyes of species that had dismissed her, mocked her, and voted against her. She did not throw any of it back at them. The enemy is not gone, she said simply. They retreated. They will study what happened. They will adapt. When they return, and they will return, a single ship will not be enough to stop them, no matter how powerful that ship is. She let that settle. Humanity is willing to share what we have. Shield technology that can resist the resonant pulse. Weapon systems that can damage their hulls. Sensor upgrades that can detect them before they appear on top of you. She paused. But we have a condition. The chamber tensed. This was the moment every species had feared. The humans had power now. Real power. What would they demand? Territory? Control of the conclave? Submission? We want a new accord, Renus said. Equal representation for every species in this chamber. No more tears. No more dismissing the small and the weak because they lack warships or trade routes. Every distress call answered. Every colony protected. No exceptions. The silence that followed was different from the one that had greeted her months ago. That silence had been contempt. This one was surprise. Alamis recovered first. You have the most powerful weapon in the galaxy, and your demand is fairness? We built the silence because we watched what happens in a galaxy that ignores the vulnerable, Renus said. We will not let that continue. Not for ourselves, and not for anyone else. From the upper galleries, a small voice called out. I accept. It was Polth. The Finny trader stood among his people, his fur brushed clean, his back straight. He looked terrified and determined in equal measure. The Finny accept the accord. Whatever the humans ask, they have earned it 10 times over. The Bavari delegates followed immediately, their soft voices rising together. Then the smaller species joined, one after another, until the upper galleries were a chorus of agreement from every civilization that had ever been overlooked. The major powers held back. Alamis deliberated with his Dravani delegation for several long minutes before returning to the podium. The Dravani accept, he said carefully, with provisions for negotiation on trade terms. Agreed, Renus said. The Palori shifted and rippled. Their consensus took longer. Hive minds do not rush. But eventually their speaker declared acceptance in a voice like wind through reeds. I turned to the Sathine delegation. Without Bragan present, they were led by a younger officer who looked deeply uncomfortable. The vote was symbolic anyway. The Sathine fleet was in pieces, but pride was all the Sathine had left. Then a communication came through to the chamber from Bragan himself. He was still aboard the Iron Tooth, still drifting, still waiting for rescue. His voice was rough and tired. Stripped of the arrogance that had defined him, he said one word. Yes. The accord passed, in the weeks that followed. Humanity moved fast. Engineers arrived at Sathine shipyards to install shield upgrades. Technicians shared sensor plans with the Palori. Training teams worked with Dravani logistics officers to coordinate supply lines for a combined fleet. Polth was appointed to the new Joint Council, the first Finny to hold such a position, and he took his seat with wide eyes and trembling hands. Aboard the Silence, Admiral Danny Reeves stood at a viewport and watched the Allied fleet begin to take shape around her ship. Sathine warships with new human shielding. Palori carriers loaded with redesigned fighters. Dravani transports humming with supplies. Her second-in-command joined her. Long-range probes picked something up, he said quietly. Deep space. The enemy is massing. Bigger than before. Much bigger. Danny nodded. She had expected this. The first encounter had been a test. The enemy now knew what they were facing, and they were bringing everything. How long, she asked. Days. Maybe less. Danny looked at the growing fleet outside her viewport. A week ago, these species would not have spoken to each other. Now, they were preparing to fight side by side because a species they had laughed at gave them a reason to trust. "Then we had better be ready," she said. Outside the viewport, the stars were quiet. But somewhere in the darkness, the enemy was gathering, and the silence between the stars felt heavier than it ever had before. They came out of the dark like a wound opening in space. Hundreds of black ships poured from the void at the edge of the galactic arm, more than anyone had ever seen, arranged in formations that moved with the precision of a single mind. And at their center, something far worse that IT was massive, a structure the size of a small moon, covered in the same black hull as the warships, but pulsing with a deep, visible energy that rippled across its surface like a heartbeat. Sensors across the Allied fleet identified it immediately as the source of the resonant pulse. It was not just a command ship. It was a harvester built to strip entire star systems of life. Admiral Danny Reeves watched it appear on the Silence's main display and felt something cold settle in her chest. The simulations had predicted this. They had been right about the numbers, right about the harvester, right about everything except how it would feel to actually see it. "All fleet elements, report status," she said. The responses came in across species and languages, translated in real time by human-designed communication systems. Suthene warships formed the front line, their hulls glowing faintly with new shield generators. Palori carriers sat behind them, ready to launch thousands of fighters. Dravani logistics ships held the rear, coordinating supply and repair. And scattered throughout the formation, small and fast, Finny and Bavari scout vessels relayed real-time intelligence to every ship in the fleet. That IT was the first time these species had ever fought together. Most of them had been enemies or strangers a week ago. Now, they were a single force, held together by technology humanity had shared and trust that had been earned in the hardest way possible. The harvester fired first. The resonant pulse rolled outward in a visible wave, distorting space as it came. It hit the Allied fleet like a wall. Shields flickered. Systems strained. Smaller ships shook violently. But the human-designed dampeners held. The pulse washed over them and passed, and the fleet was still standing. "Dampeners holding across all squadrons," Danny's second-in-command reported. "Good," Danny said. "All units, engage." The battle erupted across 1,000 kilometers of space. Suthene warships charged forward with the fury their species was known for, but this time with shields that actually protected them. Their weapons, upgraded with human targeting systems, found gaps in the enemy hulls that had been invisible before. Black ships began to crack and break for the first time. The Palori launched their fighter swarms, tens of thousands of small craft piloted by fragments of the hive mind, moving in perfect coordination. They surrounded enemy vessels and tore at them from every angle, overwhelming defenses through sheer numbers and unity. Aboard a communications vessel in the center of the formation, Rena Sandoval worked without rest. She coordinated between species that spoke different languages, thought in different ways, and fought with different instincts. When the Palori began pulling back out of instinct to protect their core, she talked them through it, reminding them that the fleet needed their fighters forward. When the Suthene pushed too far ahead and broke formation, she redirected them calmly. When a Finny scout captain reported enemy reinforcements arriving on the flank, her voice cracking with fear, Rena simply said, "Good work. Stay on sensors. We see them." She was the thread holding the alliance together, and she never raised her voice once. The silence moved through the center of the battle toward the harvester. Enemy ships tried to intercept it, but its gravitational weapons cleared a path, folding black ships out of existence one by one. The harvester seemed to recognize the threat. It turned its massive bulk toward the silence and unleashed a concentrated pulse. Not the broad wave it had used before, but a focused beam of resonant energy aimed directly at the human ship. The silence shuddered. For the first time, its systems flickered. Warning lights appeared across the command deck. The focus pulse was stronger than anything they had faced. Shields at 60% and dropping, an officer called out. "Maintain course," Danny ordered. "Charge the main weapon." The silence pressed forward, absorbing punishment with every meter. Danny needed one clear shot at the Harvester's core, but the focus pulse was degrading her ship's systems faster than they could compensate. Then a battered Sathine cruiser broke from the main formation and accelerated toward the Harvester. Its shields were failing and its hull was cracked, but it moved with purpose. The ship's commander sent a single transmission to the fleet, clearing the path. It was Bragan. His cruiser slammed into the Harvester's pulse emitter at full speed. The impact was enormous. The cruiser crumpled like tin against the Harvester's hull, but the emitter shattered. The focus beam died instantly. The pressure on the silence vanished. "Fire," Danny said. The silence unleashed everything. A sustained gravitational collapse beam struck the Harvester's exposed core. The massive structure groaned, a sound that traveled through space itself, vibrating through every ship in the fleet. Then it folded inward, collapsing on itself in a cascade of crushed metal and dying energy until it simply ceased to be. Without the Harvester, the enemy fleet lost all coordination. Ships scattered in every direction, firing blindly, crashing into each other. Within minutes, they were in full retreat, vanishing into the void. The battle was over. Bragan was pulled from his shattered cruiser alive, barely. When asked why he did it, he answered through broken teeth. "Someone had to hold the line. The humans taught me that." The new conclave met on Earth, in a hall with open windows facing a blue sky. Species that had laughed at humanity sat beside them as equals. Rena spoke about what the galaxy had learned. That real strength is not armor or weapons, but the willingness to stand for others when no one else will. Polth, in his new council seat, looked out the window at the human sky and thought that for a world of small, soft creatures, it had produced something extraordinary. Far away, at the edge of known space, the silence drifted. Watching, patient, ready. The void was quiet, for now.